The crew of the Starhawk had seen many strange things in the vast emptiness of space, but nothing could prepare them for what they found that day. The ship drifted into the quiet sector of space, a place where few had ever dared to go. No one had expected to find anything here. The scanner showed only the silence of a dead zone, but the crew had learned long ago never to trust what their instruments told them without investigating first. They needed to be sure. Commander Evelyn Drake stood at the helm, her eyes scanning the screens in front of her. "We're almost there," she said, her voice calm but filled with curiosity. "Prepare for visual confirmation." The crew followed her instructions, each member doing their part. As they approached the coordinates, the tension in the air grew. This was supposed to be a routine mission. Check a few readings, and then move on. But there was something about this location that felt off. It was too quiet, too empty, as if the universe itself had forgotten this place existed. And then they saw it. At first, it looked like nothing more than a broken piece of debris, drifting aimlessly in space. But as they drew closer, the true shape of the wreck became clear. It was the twisted remains of a ship, one that was unlike anything they had ever seen. The hull was dark, scorched, and covered in strange symbols that seemed to pulse faintly with a glow. There were no signs of life, no signals, and no movement. It was as if the ship had been abandoned long ago, left to rot in the vastness of space. The Starhawk hovered nearby, the crew unsure of what to do next. "What do you make of it, Dr. Wells?" Commander Drake asked, turning to the ship's chief scientist. Dr. Wells, a tall, thin man with glasses that always seemed to slide down his nose, leaned forward in his seat, studying the wreck with a keen eye. "It's old," he said, his voice filled with uncertainty. "Very old, but there's something strange about it. The metal doesn't match anything in our database, and the energy readings, they're off the charts. It's like the ship is still alive." The commander frowned, glancing at the rest of the crew. "Alive?" Wells nodded, his expression serious. "I'm not sure how to explain it, but the wreck seems reactive. The readings show that the ship has some kind of energy source still active. It's almost like it's waiting for something." A chill ran through the crew. They had all heard stories of ancient alien ships, lost for centuries and holding untold secrets. But they had never expected to encounter something like this. Most people believed that any such ships were nothing more than myths, leftover remnants of forgotten species. But now, they were staring at the very thing that could change everything they thought they knew about the universe. Commander Drake stared at the wreck, feeling the weight of the situation press down on her. "We can't leave without investigating. Prepare a team. We're going aboard." A sense of unease spread through the crew, but no one dared to argue. They had been trained for situations like this, where the unknown could either be a treasure trove of knowledge or a deadly trap. No one knew what lay inside the wreck, but one thing was certain. This was a discovery that couldn't be ignored. As the team gathered their equipment and prepared to board the wreck, the silence in the ship felt heavier than usual. Everyone was on edge, their minds racing with thoughts of what they might find. Was this an alien ship? If so, what had happened to its crew? Why was it left to drift in space, forgotten and abandoned? The Starhawk's airlock hissed open, and the team stepped into the sleek, cold environment of the wreck. The interior of the ship was just as strange as its exterior. The walls were smooth, metallic, and covered in those same glowing symbols that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. There was no sign of any life forms, no bodies, no signs of a struggle, just an eerie stillness that filled the air. Dr. Wells moved forward, his eyes wide as he examined every detail. "This is incredible," he muttered under his breath. "This ship doesn't belong to any species we know. It's not even built the way any of the ancient races constructed their ships. This is something entirely new." Commander Drake's voice cut through the scientists' excitement. "Stay focused, everyone. We don't know what we're dealing with yet." As the team explored deeper into the wreck, they discovered a strange control room. The center of the room was dominated by a massive console covered in alien symbols, but as the team approached, the symbols began to shift, rearranging themselves in a way that seemed purposeful. "We're not alone," Wells whispered, his voice barely audible. "The ship is reacting to us." Drake's heart raced. It was one thing to find an ancient wreck, but it was another thing entirely to realize that the ship might not be as abandoned as it seemed. The wreck wasn't just a piece of space junk. It was something much more dangerous, something that had the potential to change the course of human history. But the questions remained. What had happened to the crew of this ship, and what secrets were hidden inside its walls? As they continued to investigate, the answers remained elusive, the ship's mysteries only deepening with every step they took. And somewhere, hidden within the wreck, a voice seemed to whisper, waiting for them to uncover its truth. The crew had no idea what they had stumbled upon, but one thing was certain: they had just opened the door to something far bigger than they could have ever imagined. The decision to salvage the wreck wasn't an easy one. The crew had already encountered so much strangeness: alien technology, glowing symbols, and an eerie silence. But despite the fear that crept into their minds, they couldn't just leave it behind. The wreck was a mystery they had to solve, no matter the cost. Commander Drake stood on the bridge of the Starhawk, staring out at the wreck. It was an ancient ship, unlike anything humanity had ever seen. The strange energy readings still hovered on their scanners, pulsing with an almost sentient rhythm. It was clear the ship was no ordinary piece of debris. It was alive. Not in the biological sense, but in some way, the wreck seemed to have a presence, a consciousness that was aware of their every move. "Commander," Lieutenant Harris's voice cut through the silence, breaking Drake from her thoughts. "I've run the simulations. If we bring that ship aboard, there's a risk of contamination. The alien tech inside could be dangerous." Drake turned to face Harris, her expression stern. She trusted her team, but this was a decision that needed to be made with the bigger picture in mind. "I understand, Lieutenant, but if there's any chance this ship holds the key to unlocking the future of space travel, or even our survival, we can't leave it behind. Prepare a team. We're boarding the wreck." There was no more argument. The crew knew this mission would push them into uncharted territory, but they also knew that human progress was built on the willingness to take risks. As the team gathered their gear, the weight of the decision settled on them. This wasn't just a salvage operation. This was the discovery of a lifetime, or perhaps the end of it. The airlock doors opened with a hiss, and the team stepped out onto the wreck. The darkness inside was unnerving, the glow of the symbols casting strange shadows along the walls. It felt like stepping into a tomb. The silence was thick, almost oppressive, and the hum of the ship's systems was a constant reminder that they weren't alone. Yet, the absence of life was palpable. "Stay alert," Drake ordered, her voice steady but tinged with an edge of caution. "We don't know what we're dealing with here." The crew moved cautiously, their footsteps echoing in the empty corridors. Dr. Wells, the ship's chief scientist, led the way. He was the first to notice something strange. As they moved deeper into the wreck, the ship's strange symbols seemed to glow brighter. They pulsed, almost like a heartbeat, reacting to their presence. It was subtle at first, a slight flicker in the dim light, but it was enough to send a shiver down the spine of everyone on board. "Are you seeing this?" Dr. Wells asked, his voice filled with wonder. "The symbols, they are responding to us. This is unlike anything I've ever seen." Commander Drake stepped closer to the walls, her fingers brushing lightly against the cold surface. The symbols shifted, rearranging themselves as if they were alive. She could feel it, too, an energy that seemed to come from deep within the wreck. It was as if the ship itself was aware of their presence, as if it was waiting for them to make the next move. "This is unsettling," Lieutenant Harris muttered, his eyes darting around the room. "I don't like the way it's reacting to us." Wells turned to him, his face alight with excitement. This ship is unlike anything we've ever encountered. Its technology, its design, it's centuries ahead of us, maybe more. I don't care how advanced it is. Harris snapped, his nerves showing. If it's dangerous. I know, Drake interrupted, her tone firm. We'll be careful, but we need to keep moving. The more we learn, the better prepared we'll be. The crew continued their exploration, but the further they went, the stranger things became. The ship seemed to grow more alive, more sentient. There were chambers with strange machinery, doors that opened and closed seemingly on their own, and pathways that led them deeper into the ship's dark heart. As they reached what appeared to be the command center, the air grew colder, the lights dimming to a faint glow. At the center of the room stood a massive console, its surface covered in the same symbols that had adorned the ship's exterior. Dr. Wells approached it cautiously, his hands hovering over the controls. "This is it," he said in awe. "This is the heart of the ship, if we can get it working." Before he could finish his sentence, the ship seemed to react. The symbols on the console began to shift rapidly, glowing brighter, their movements faster and more erratic. It was like the ship was trying to communicate, but the language was foreign, incomprehensible. Then, as suddenly as it had started, everything stopped. The symbols froze, the ship falling into an eerie silence. "What the hell was that?" Harris asked, his voice low and filled with tension. "I don't know," Wells replied, his brow furrowed. "But I think it's trying to tell us something. This ship isn't just a wreck, it's a message. A warning." Commander Drake stepped closer to the console, her gaze locked on the glowing symbols. There was something in them, something that reached out to her. She couldn't explain it, but she knew that the ship's message was meant for them. It wasn't just about the technology or the knowledge. It was about something deeper, something far more important than any of them had realized. "This is only the beginning," she said, her voice steady. "We've only scratched the surface. We need to figure out what this ship wants and why it brought us here." The team exchanged uneasy glances. They had entered the wreck with a sense of curiosity and wonder, but now there was a growing sense of dread. This ship was no ordinary find. It had a purpose, a message, and whatever that message was, it was clear that humanity was not the first to discover it. And as they looked at the strange symbols, glowing softly in the dim light, they realized something else. They had awakened something, and that something was watching them. The deeper the crew ventured into the wreck, the more the ship seemed to reveal itself. The walls pulsed with faint light, almost as if the ship had a heartbeat. Commander Drake couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, even though there was no sign of life anywhere. It was as if the wreck itself had become aware of their presence, adapting to their every move. The crew had set up camp in the central chamber, a massive room filled with intricate machinery. Dr. Wells had been tirelessly studying the alien technology, trying to make sense of it. He could barely contain his excitement. "This is incredible," he exclaimed, his voice crackling with enthusiasm. "These engines, they're like nothing we've ever seen. The materials, the design, it's so advanced it almost defies understanding." Drake walked over, trying to follow his thoughts, but she couldn't keep up. The tech was alien, and even Wells, who had spent decades studying advanced systems, looked bewildered. Yet there was a clarity in his voice, a certainty that whatever the ship was, it held knowledge that could propel humanity forward into a new age. "Can you make sense of any of this?" Drake asked, her voice steady but laced with concern. "I need to know what we're dealing with. If this technology is as powerful as it looks, we need to be prepared." Wells ran a hand through his hair, clearly agitated by the overwhelming data. "I'm trying. But it's like trying to understand a language without knowing the alphabet. The systems are designed with materials we don't even have on Earth. They use quantum elements for storage, but the energy conversion methods are unlike anything in our current tech." Drake nodded, a knot tightening in her chest. The excitement in Wells's voice was undeniable, But there was an edge of danger to this situation that no one could ignore. They had found a wreck, yes, but what if it was a trap? What if the ship had been abandoned for a reason? The silence in the room was broken by Lieutenant Harris's voice from the other side. "Commander, you need to see this." Drake turned swiftly, signaling for the team to follow. They entered another room, smaller but packed with even more alien devices. At the center of the room was an ancient control panel, covered in the same pulsating symbols they had seen earlier. But this time, it was different. The moment they stepped inside, the symbols on the console began to shift, moving in intricate patterns. It was like the ship itself was responding to their presence, acknowledging them. The air felt charged with energy, and for a brief moment, the crew felt an odd sense of connection. It was as if the wreck was alive, communicating with them on a level they couldn't understand. Wells immediately approached the console, his eyes wide with awe. "This is it," he murmured, as if speaking to himself. "This is the core interface." He reached out, his fingers hovering over the controls. The symbols shifted once more, becoming a clearer pattern, as though they were slowly forming a message. The air around them grew heavier, and the lights in the room dimmed, making it feel as though they were on the edge of something monumental. Drake felt a strange chill run down her spine. It was as if the ship were about to reveal a truth, one that could change everything. Suddenly, the console emitted a low hum, followed by a burst of static. The symbols flashed, brighter this time, then abruptly stopped. The room fell into complete silence. The crew exchanged uneasy glances. "What was that?" Harris asked, his voice tight. Drake stepped forward, her hand brushing the surface of the console. The coolness of it seemed almost welcoming, but there was an undeniable tension in the air. She felt a strange pressure behind her eyes, as though the ship was trying to push its thoughts into her mind. It was an unsettling sensation, as if the wreck wasn't just sending data, it was reaching out, trying to connect on a deeper level. "This ship has been waiting," Wells said, his voice filled with a strange reverence. "It's been dormant for so long, and now it's reacting. But to what? To us, or to something else?" Before anyone could respond, there was a soft click, followed by a deep rumble that seemed to vibrate through the floor. The lights flickered back on, and the symbols on the console shifted once again. This time, they began to spell out a word in a language the crew didn't recognize, but they could feel its meaning. It was not a word, exactly, but more like a concept, an invitation. The air felt thick with anticipation, and Drake instinctively took a step back. "What does it mean?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Wells squinted at the symbols, trying to decode them. "I'm not sure, but it's clear this ship isn't just ancient tech. It's trying to communicate with us." Just as the weight of that realization settled over the crew, there was a sudden, sharp noise, a low, vibrating hum that seemed to come from deep within the ship. It was followed by a tremor in the walls, as though the entire wreck had shifted. "We need to get out of here," Harris said quickly, his voice urgent. "Now." But before anyone could react, the ship's systems came to life in a way they hadn't expected. The humming grew louder, and the floor beneath them began to tremble. The walls groaned, and a faint mechanical whirring sound echoed from within the depths of the ship. Drake's heart raced. Something was happening. The ship was responding, and it was not just curious about them. It was reacting to their presence in a way that felt deliberate, even hostile. The crew moved quickly, gathering their gear and heading back toward the Starhawk, but the ship's tremors only intensified. As they rushed down the corridors, Wells muttered to himself, his mind racing. "We're too close to understanding it. The ship, it's alive. And it's not just technology, it's something more. It has purpose." They reached the airlock, but the ship's tremors shook the walls again, this time stronger, as if the ship were trying to stop them from leaving. The symbols on the walls flared to life, glowing brighter than ever before, and for a moment, the crew stood frozen in the doorway. Drake realized something crucial in that moment. The ship wasn't just waiting for them to figure it out. It had a plan, one they didn't yet understand. It had been dormant for centuries, but now it was waking up. And whatever it had been built for, it was preparing to reveal its secrets. But the question remained, was humanity ready to learn them? The tremors continued, reverberating through the wreck as the crew hurried back toward the airlock. With each passing moment, the ship seemed to grow more active, as though it were coming to life. The hum of its systems was louder now, the strange symbols on the walls glowing with an intensity that seemed to pulse with a rhythm all its own. It felt as though the ship itself was alive, aware, watching, and waiting for something. "Move faster," Drake called out, her voice sharp with urgency. She could feel the weight of the ship's growing power in the air, a tangible force that made the very walls seem to vibrate. The Starhawk was still docked, but it was beginning to feel like they might not make it back in time. The closer they got to the airlock, the more the ship's energy seemed to increase, its movements more pronounced, like it was responding to their panic. Wells was at the front of the group, his mind racing as he tried to process what had happened. "I don't understand," he muttered under his breath. "The ship was dormant for so long, yet it's reacting to us now like we've triggered something. It doesn't make sense. This technology is beyond anything we've seen, but it's more than that. It feels like it's been waiting." Drake could hear the fear in Wells's voice, something she hadn't expected. The scientist, usually so confident in his knowledge, was at a loss, and that made her fear this situation even more. "Keep moving," she barked again, pushing the team forward. The airlock was just ahead, the cold metal door waiting to seal them back into the safety of the Starhawk. But as they reached it, another tremor shook the wreck, more intense than before. The walls groaned, and a deep rumbling sound echoed through the hallways. For a moment, everything went dark. The lights flickered wildly, casting long, erratic shadows across the ship's strange interior. Then the lights came back on, but this time, the symbols on the walls were no longer just glowing. They were shifting, moving rapidly, their forms twisting and merging together, as though they were trying to form words, messages that the crew couldn't decipher. The air felt thick with an energy that was almost oppressive, the very atmosphere in the ship charged with an eerie power. "We need to leave now," Harris said, his voice tight with panic as he tugged at the airlock controls. "We've overstayed our welcome here. I don't care what's happening. I'm not waiting around to find out." Drake hesitated. There was a growing sense that whatever was happening, they were on the edge of something monumental. But the ship's strange behavior, its growing power, was more than enough to make her question their safety. "We can't just leave," she replied, her voice a mixture of determination and concern. "We need to understand what this ship is trying to tell us. It's not just a wreck, it's something else. We've come this far, and I'm not going to turn back now." But just as she spoke, the tremors returned, this time with a ferocity that sent the crew staggering. The walls shook violently, and the lights flickered once again, plunging them into darkness. The ship's hum grew louder, now accompanied by a low, deep growl that seemed to resonate within the very bones of the crew. Suddenly, the strange symbols on the walls began to pulse and vibrate, as if they were alive. A low, haunting sound filled the room, and the ship's once silent corridors came alive with activity. The alien machinery, which had remained dormant up until now, powered on, lights flashing in rapid succession, while the walls themselves began to shift and move. The crew was thrown off balance, as the ship seemed to react to their presence with increasing intensity. The walls groaned under the strain of some hidden mechanism coming to life. A sharp screech filled the air as something massive began to move deep within the ship, its movements echoing through the very structure of the wreck. "Get to the airlock now," Drake ordered, her voice cutting through the chaos. But even as they rushed toward the door, the ship seemed to resist their every move. The walls bent and twisted, blocking their path, forcing them to backtrack and take another route. It was as though the ship itself had become a labyrinth, a living organism that was trying to keep them inside. The crew stumbled through the corridors, their hearts pounding as they tried to navigate the increasingly unstable ship. The walls closed in around them, and the strange symbols began to glow brighter, casting an otherworldly light on their path. It was as though the ship was trying to guide them. But toward what? Finally, they reached a new room, one they hadn't seen before. It was unlike any of the others. The walls were made of smooth, translucent material that shimmered with an eerie, shifting glow. At the center of the room stood a large structure, a massive alien engine that seemed to pulse with life. It hummed softly, vibrating with a deep energy that made the entire room tremble. The symbols on the walls were now glowing furiously, and the air felt thick, heavy with the power of whatever lay within the machine. Drake stepped forward cautiously, her eyes drawn to the engine. She could feel the ship's power, its consciousness, all around her. It was almost as though the wreck was aware of them, watching their every move, waiting for them to make a decision. "What is this?" Wells asked, his voice barely a whisper as he examined the engine. It's not like anything we've seen before. This isn't just a machine. It's something else. Something that can think." Drake nodded slowly, her hand resting on the cold surface of the engine. She could feel a pulse beneath her fingertips, a subtle vibration that seemed to resonate deep within her chest. It was as though the ship was alive, not just in the physical sense, but in a deeper, more profound way. "This ship was never just a wreck," she said quietly, almost to herself. "It was built for a purpose. And we just triggered it. We've activated something that we don't fully understand." The others gathered around her, their faces filled with a mix of awe and fear. Whatever this ship was, it was far more than they could have ever imagined. And the mystery that had begun with a simple wreck was now leading them into the heart of something far more dangerous, something that could change everything. But just as they stood there, trying to comprehend the magnitude of their discovery, the ship's hum grew louder, more intense. The walls vibrated violently, and a blinding light filled the room. The crew staggered back, shielding their eyes from the brilliance. And then, in an instant, everything stopped. The light faded, the hum quieted, and the ship fell silent once again. The crew stood frozen, waiting for the next step, but no one dared to move. The wreck had revealed a fragment of its power, and now they were left to wonder what the next step in this terrifying journey would be. Silence lingered like a storm waiting to break. No one moved. The crew stood still, eyes wide, breath shallow, and hearts pounding in the aftershock of the blinding light. The alien engine had gone dormant again, but the hum still echoed in the air, soft but ever-present, like the calm breath of a sleeping beast. Commander Drake took a cautious step forward, her boots clicking against the smooth floor. The pulsing symbols along the walls had dimmed, returning to their faint glow, but the sense of pressure in the air hadn't gone. It was like the ship had paused to think, to watch, to measure them. Wells was the first to speak. "It showed us something. Not a warning. More like an invitation." Drake turned to face him. Invitation to what? The scientist stared at the core engine, his voice distant, almost reverent. A chance, a message, maybe even a test. The moment he said that, the walls of the room began to shimmer again, not with light, but with images. Faint holographic projections emerged in the air, showing strange alien symbols, then scenes, massive ships, battles in space, unfamiliar stars, and then Earth, humanity, a child holding a piece of broken metal, and then that metal turning into a sleek warship. The crew stared in disbelief. It wasn't just a machine. It was telling a story about war, about survival, and about creation. Drake slowly stepped into the center of the room, her eyes locked on the swirling images. "It knows who we are." "No," said Wells. "It's known for a long time." The crew remained quiet, trying to grasp the reality of what they were seeing. This ship hadn't crashed randomly. It had been placed here, abandoned, hidden, waiting, maybe all of those things. The galaxy had kept this secret for centuries, and now it was being handed to them. A panel near the engine hissed open, revealing a long corridor that hadn't existed moments ago. The walls adjusted as if the ship had grown, reshaping itself to offer a new path. Drake glanced at her team. "Looks like it wants us to keep going." Harris hesitated. "This feels like a trap. Or a path," Wells said, already moving forward. Reluctantly, the others followed. The corridor was unlike the rest of the wreck. Cleaner, smoother, as if it had only just been activated. The lights were a deep violet, casting strange shadows. The crew advanced slowly, their weapons ready, though no one truly believed bullets would help against whatever force controlled the ship. As they moved deeper, a strange gravity seemed to take hold. Not stronger, just different. Time felt slower, like they were walking through a dream. Their comms crackled with faint interference, even though they were all together. Then the corridor opened into another chamber, this one vast and circular, like the heart of the ship. At the center was a chair. Not mechanical, not simple. It looked grown, sculpted from the same living material as the ship, and it was floating slightly above the floor. Around it, large curved panels formed a sphere of sorts, half open like petals around a flower. The chair was empty, but it felt like someone, or something, should be sitting in it. Drake approached cautiously, her voice low. "This looks like a command seat." Wells nodded, his eyes scanning the panels. "Yes, and not just for piloting. This is where the ship connects with its commander. Mind and machine merged." They circled the seats slowly. No controls, no buttons, only smooth surfaces and the faint hum of power. It didn't need hands. It needed thoughts. "This isn't just a warship," Drake said softly. "It's a living vessel, a partner. It doesn't follow orders. It chooses its captain." As if responding to her words, the seat pulsed with light, a slow, glowing heartbeat, one that matched her own. Drake stepped closer. "It's choosing now." Harris raised his weapon slightly. "Commander, are you sure about this?" "No," she said honestly, "but I think it's been waiting long enough." She reached out slowly and touched the side of the seat. In that instant, the room vanished. Not literally, but in her mind. Her body froze, but her mind fell into a flood of images, sounds, and voices, memories that weren't hers, worlds that didn't exist. 1,000 years of history compressed into seconds. She saw empires fall, planets burn, and a fleet of ships, just like this one, rising from the ruins. She saw the creators, tall, bright-eyed beings with minds as sharp as stars. They had built this ship not to conquer, but to protect. And when their war ended, they sealed it away, waiting for another race, one desperate, daring, and driven enough to find it. Drake gasped and pulled her hand back, nearly falling to her knees. "Commander." Wells rushed to her side. "I saw it," she said breathlessly. "I saw everything." "The ship connected with you," Wells said in awe. "It accepted you." "No," Drake whispered. "It chose us." A faint vibration passed through the floor again, this time less violent, more rhythmic, like the ship was breathing in sync with her. The panels around the chair began to glow, and one by one, the systems came online. Displays lit up. Internal structures shifted. Power surged through the veins of the vessel. The wreck was gone. Now it was becoming. And the crew? They were no longer explorers. They were now the first humans ever to bond with a ship designed by a lost alien race, a ship capable of rewriting humanity's place in the galaxy. But this was just the beginning. And somewhere, in the stars far beyond, something else stirred, something that remembered this ship, something that had destroyed the others. The transformation was no longer silent. The once derelict wreck now groaned with life. Systems reactivated one after another, like nerves firing in a body waking from centuries of sleep. Panels aligned themselves across walls, Screens flickered to life with alien star maps, and conduits hummed with raw energy. It wasn't chaotic. It was purposeful, like the ship knew exactly what it needed to do, and now it had a crew to do it with. Drake stood in the center of the command chamber, staring at the console that had risen from the floor. It wasn't made for hands, but as she stepped closer, the interface responded to her presence. Lights followed her fingertips without touching them, dancing in midair, reshaping to mimic the language of human interaction. The ship was adapting. "It's not just responding, it's learning," Wells whispered, watching the interface evolve in real time. "Or remembering," Drake replied. "This ship's seen minds like ours before." Harris stood at the rear of the chamber, clearly on edge. "This is way past anything I signed up for. We were supposed to salvage a hunk of metal, not awaken some alien eye with a god complex." Drake turned, her eyes locked on his. "This ship didn't choose us by accident. And we're not just passengers anymore. We're in command of something ancient and powerful," Wells added. "We have no idea what its limits are." That power made itself clearer with every moment. What once looked like damaged architecture was now shifting into place. Exterior plating realigned itself, panels slid into formation, and long-dormant weapons began to emerge from hidden bays, sleek, silent, deadly. Outside, the Starhawk hovered nearby, dwarfed by the alien vessel as it began to change. From orbit, it would have looked like a cocoon shedding its skin, new metal growing over the old, reshaping the wreck into a warship that belonged in the stars, not buried in forgotten space. Drake finally spoke again. "We need to test what it can do." Wells nodded. "There's a simulator built into the system. Training scenarios, historical battles, even full command pathways. We can use it to learn without putting the ship or ourselves at risk." "Do it." The lights dimmed for a moment, and a new projection surrounded them. The walls of the chamber shimmered and shifted, transforming into a massive simulated starfield. The crew found themselves standing on what looked like a holographic bridge, surrounded by enemy ships. "This is a memory," Wells said, wide-eyed. "A real battle." From the ship's past, the simulation began. Enemy vessels fired first, sleek, curved alien ships unlike anything in human space. The warship, under their feet, moved in response to Drake's instincts before she even spoke. A subtle connection formed between her and the vessel, commands shaped by thought, emotion, even intent. She raised her hand slightly. The warship twisted, weapons rotated, and with a low pulse of energy, a blast of blue light lanced through the lead enemy ship, cutting it in half. The second followed in seconds. Shields absorbed fire with ease, and engines responded with near-organic fluidity. Harris stood frozen. "We're not piloting it. We're just guiding it." "This ship doesn't need a crew," Wells whispered. "It needs a purpose." And suddenly, Drake understood. "This isn't just a weapon," she said. "It's a test, a message. If we're meant to use this ship, it's because something worse is coming. Something the original builders couldn't stop. This is humanity's chance to finish what they started." The simulation ended, fading back to the real command center. But the message lingered. The ship had chosen. It had given them power. And with it, responsibility. That responsibility became even more urgent when the communications console flashed with an alert. A signal, faint but undeniable, was coming through. Wells rushed to decode it. "It's a distress call. Human." "From the Starhawk?" Drake asked. He shook his head slowly. "No, it's not from our ship. It's coming from a station out past the asteroid field, or what's left of it." The screen flickered and showed the aftermath of destruction. Debris floating through space, station parts scattered, scorch marks across metal. The signal repeated again. "Help. Unknown enemy. Not human. We're under attack." Then silence. Everyone stared at the screen. The crew didn't speak, but the ship reacted. Lights shifted, power surged, navigation systems aligned. The warship wanted to move. It had heard the call, too. Drake clenched her jaw. We answer it. A ship didn't need further input. The engines roared to life, no longer a whispering hum, but a thunderous surge. The wreck was gone. In its place flew a sleek, deadly warship built for battle, now reborn by human hands, and it had somewhere to be. As the stars shifted around them, and the ship tore through the void faster than anything human-made ever had, Drake felt something new in her chest. Not fear, not confusion. Readiness. The war had already begun. And now, humanity had a ship worthy of the fight. The stars stretched into thin lines as the warship entered faster than light travel, its alien engines humming in perfect harmony with Drake's thoughts. She didn't sit in a traditional captain's chair. She didn't have to. The ship responded to her presence, her focus, her instincts. Each thought echoed through the vessel's neural network, directing power, aligning trajectory, calculating strategies. The rest of the crew stood at their stations, silent but tense, watching the unfolding journey with a mixture of awe and unease. They weren't heading into a battle. They were diving into the unknown. The distress signal had led them toward a destroyed research station, one Drake recognized from their earlier surveys. It had gone dark nearly a month ago, marked as a simple communications failure, but now they knew better. Something had torn it apart. The ship dropped from FTL with a subtle ripple. No jolt, no shaking, just a seamless arrival into a graveyard of twisted metal. What remained of the station floated in massive chunks, some still faintly glowing from recent impacts. Lifeless, silent, but not empty. They were ambushed, Harris said grimly, scanning the debris. No warning, no escape. Wells leaned over the console, filtering sensor data. There's something else out there. Something's hiding in the wreckage. Power readings are faint, but not human. Not like anything we've seen. Drake narrowed her eyes. Weapons ready. Shields at full. The warship responded before she finished speaking. Turrets extended smoothly from its hull. Shielding systems crackled to life, forming a translucent layer around the ship. The crew felt the tension rise, though the warship itself remained calm, almost like it was waiting. Then it came. Without a sound, a sleek black vessel emerged from the debris. It didn't glide. It slithered. Its surface rippled like liquid metal, adapting shape, adjusting form. No visible weapons. No communication. Just movement. Wells spoke first. I've seen something like this before, in the ship's memory banks. That's what destroyed the alien creators, a parasite. A species that doesn't build or create. It consumes. It infects. It replaces. Drake's voice was firm. And now it's here. The alien vessel pulsed once, and then launched a sudden, violent beam of energy. It didn't come from a weapon. It came from the ship itself, like it was bleeding power. The beam struck the warship's shields with a flash, sending a deep vibration through the deck. Shields holding, Harris reported, gripping the rail. Barely. Drake didn't hesitate. Returned fire. Hit it hard. Again, she didn't press a button. She didn't need to. The warship understood. Cannons swiveled, charged, and unleashed a torrent of blue plasma. Unlike human weapons, these didn't just blast. They pierced, slicing through space like blades of light. The enemy ship twisted, reshaped, splitting its own hull to avoid the blasts. It was like fighting liquid metal. Unpredictable, relentless. But the warship was faster, smarter. It anticipated. It adapted. The battle danced between wreckage and silence. Space turned into a battlefield of fire and shadow. But slowly, the alien vessel began to falter. It wasn't used to being challenged. It had never faced a ship like this, one that fought back. Drake pushed harder. Every second, the connection between her and the warship deepened. She didn't just command it. She felt it, knew where to aim, when to dodge, what tactic to use. It was as if the ship had been waiting for her to unlock its true form. Then, an opening. "Now," she shouted, though the ship had already moved. A beam of pure white light fired from the core. It wasn't a weapon. It was judgment. The enemy ship twisted to dodge but failed. The light hit, tearing through its shifting body. The liquid form spat, its black metal skin dissolving into ash, scattered through space like dust in wind. Silence returned, but not peace. Drake stood still, staring at the fading remains. That was one. There will be more. Wells nodded slowly. They're spreading. This system, it's the edge of their expansion. And we just made ourselves known. A faint alert pulsed on the display. Not an enemy, but a signal, a response. From deep space, a new message was forming. Ancient, fragmented, but readable. It came from the ship itself. One survives. One awakens. The war begins again. The words weren't threatening. They were prophecy. Drake looked at her crew. No one spoke, but all of them understood. This wasn't a victory. It was a warning. They'd awakened something vast, something waiting. The parasite species wasn't just spreading, it was hunting. And now, humanity was in its path. But they had a weapon. Not just a ship, but a legacy. A warship forged from the bones of the past and reborn by human hands. And Drake, she was no longer just a commander. She was the first captain of the last great vessel of a forgotten empire. And she had no plans to run.